glad you could join us on FM After Hours, the ultimate podcast for all things facility management. We're here to take you on a journey into the ever-changing world of FM. Don't forget to check out our gracious sponsor, Remediate, your trusted partner in fire and life safety compliance, and Grainger, for the ones who get it done. And with that, let's dive in.
Welcome back to the FM After Hours show. My name is Mickey Eberts. I'm one of your hosts. I'm joined by Danielle Young, Kurt Kaiser. Again, Art's on a family vacation. He'll be back at some point.
He's going to be so. We got refills. We did in the break. And
I'll start off. Let me thank our sponsors, Remediate and Grainger. It's fantastic to have both of those helping us out. And today we're going to go into the second part of what I'll call staffing and working inside of healthcare, what that entails. So, Kirk, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think where we left off was talking about, vendors and contractors and your non-employee people coming and working their way in. And so, like, what I'd like to know is just from first person is, when you look at the companies that you would sort of invite to be in your facility and do the work, and then, well, we'll start out with that. So, like, how do you pick and determine who gets a invite, who gets, on contract, or how does that all process sort of get vetted down?
So I'll tell you what happens, and then I'll tell you what should happen. Right. So typically a facility leader is focused on the problem in front of him or her. Right. So if they've got a problem involving paint, they're asking their peers, they're researching online, trying to find local companies, right, to come in and help. Oftentimes there is a list that is sort of just handwritten down, and they go, they'll go to their painter and go, hey, who can we use? Or they'll go to their plumber and say, who can we use? Mm-hmm. It's not that doesn't work. The problem is, one, you're not ensuring quality, you're not ensuring consistency. And to be honest with you, for me, how you stayed in my hospital was you made my life easier. Like, if you constantly made my life difficult, you weren't staying in my hospital. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's talk about how you create a process that over time makes your life easier. So the first thing you want to do as a facility leader is sit down and draw up the requirements or expectations that you have for your vendors. Some of them are basic. You talked about them earlier. Everybody that comes in the hospital has to have certain shots. Everybody that comes into the hospital has to have a certain background check. Everybody that comes into the hospital needs to be drug-free, right? So those are basics. But at the same time, how much healthcare experience do you want them to have? Mm-hmm. And is it acceptable that 90% of their healthcare experience was in an ambulatory setting, or do you expect them to be able to work in a level 1 trauma center? Right? So you need to break that down, because as a facility leader, you've got non-healthcare space, you've got medical office space, you've got ambulatory space, and then you have your tertiary critical
behavioral, you could have anything, right?
Behavioral's a whole, that's actually great. I didn't even think of that.
Whole other beast.
Yeah, that you can have fantastic experience working in the most difficult healthcare environments and have no business going into a behavioral health unit, right? No business at all.
Yeah.
I've walked on a behavioral health unit and had multiple instances where we had a rule you had to have 2 people. You had to go together. One of the patients snatched a screwdriver out and was trying to stab me, right? And to be honest with you, I relaxed. I was supposed to be the one watching, and I zoned out. And the next thing you know, I got somebody trying to stab me with a screwdriver.
Yeah.
Luckily, they were little, and I was able to grab their hand. Right? Yeah. But it scared me to death. Right?
Oh, yeah. I had one where I was above the deck, right? And guy I was with turned around, went to go do something, and somebody took the ladder and was gone.
So you were up there.
I was up there. I'm like,
oh, no.
Where's the ladder? I mean, so.
Yeah.
You're like, this is where I live now.
Crazy how fast it goes on in that space.
Yeah. We had a kid that did our fire extinguisher inspections, a very big hospital in Atlanta. And he was the greatest kid. When went on our behavioral health units, the fire extinguishers are in locked cabinets. He forgot to relock one of the cabinets. So then we had what do we call it, a Dr. Strong or something, where everybody responds because we had a patient swinging a fire extinguisher trying to hit people.
Mm-hmm.
So just what seems like a minor mistake turns into potentially a life-threatening situation, right? How long did it take you before you were able to get
It
down?
was about 5 minutes where he found the
I want to
ladder.
know where they found the ladder.
Took it in some room and just put it against the wall. Like
Was it a
then-
resident or was it a
Yeah,
worker?
oh, yeah.
He's
Resident.
like, well,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is mine now. See you
Yep.
later.
Nobody was there. There's a ladder
Yeah.
and gone.
Oh
you're
my
not
gosh.
supposed, you're not supposed to
Yeah.
leave it
Yeah.
unattended,
Yeah,
right?
but you can imagine, like, when you have a tool chest,
Yeah.
they always have to be locked up. Like, every tool's got to be accounted for
Yep.
because in 1 second, like,
Yeah.
it's amazing how much stuff can be gone. Like, just
Right.
you turn your back.
Yeah, I remember the nurse manager pulling me to the side. She was a very nice lady. I knew her for a while. But she said, Mickey, you're lucky the way that played out. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, because it was a female patient. She could have just hid the screwdriver, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then hurt somebody later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, again, small things,
Yep.
you know, big problems. Okay, so going back. So, what type of experience do you expect your vendors to have? So you may have multiple lists. You may say, you know, I've got these 5 contractors that I'll call to work on my non-healthcare space. I've got these contractors that I'll call to work in my less critical healthcare space. But I'm only using 2 HVAC companies to work inside my hospital,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's when they're in the healthcare spaces and I trust them and they've done the infection control training. They understand what it's like to work in a healthcare space. They know my facility. They know where switches are, valves are. They know my staff, right? They're comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, what type of space and then how much experience? Are they 24/7, right? Do they have an on-call system?
So when you say they, is that the company? Is that the employees of the company? Is that who's they?
So that's a great clarification. I'm talking about the company,
Okay.
and then you actually have to get them to explain to you how they're structured.
Mhm.
Now, here's how I would do it. I would write down an RFQ,
Mhm.
like all these things I'm talking about. I put them on a piece of paper, and then I would give it to the companies that want to work in my facility, right? I'm not calling them and asking them all these questions, and then I'm saying, okay, you have this, you got to get it back to me
Right.
in a week.
Mhm.
And if you just half-assed it on filling out the information, you're out because I'm not going to chase you. There may be situations where I need clarification. So does the company have a structure that if I have a problem at 11 o'clock at night, that my technician can call a number and get a response? So another one is response time.
Mhm.
Am I expecting you to respond in 1 hour, in 2 hours? What if it's a holiday? Also rates,
Mhm.
right? You know, how much are you charging me per trip? Do you charge me a trip charge? Do you, what's your overtime rate? All of that. So just spell it all out,
Mhm.
right? Vet it, set your list, educate your team, and then hold people accountable. We would do, I was a huge believer in delegation. So when I say we, now I'm talking about inside the hospital, I would have my HVAC lead conduct an annual evaluation with his contractors.
Mhm.
I had my electrical lead conduct an annual evaluation of his contractors. So you may get kicked out,
Mhm.
right?
So when you call that number at 11 o'clock at night, is there a pre-select list of employees that are allowed to come in your hospital, or is that left up to the company to who's going to come out, or how does that work?
So typically it wasn't a pre-select list of people.
Mm-hmm.
It was people that they hired to meet certain criteria.
Mm-hmm. So you're leaving it up to them,
Yes.
and does that cause problems?
Can I tell you a time when it did? Yes, it will.
Right.
But also that's going to be a red mark or a strike against that contractor. Right?
Okay.
So when we're talking about the electrical lead talking to the electrical contractors, hey, in September we had a bad experience. We've already talked about it. I don't want Joe out here anymore. He doesn't meet
Okay.
the.
Yep.
But you control it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah. Now, there may be somebody out there in FM land that has taken it steps further and identified and said, it will be this set of people.
Mm-hmm.
We were more apt to do that in construction, and it was more around the superintendent and the project manager. So if let's say we were bidding out a $15 million job,
Mm-hmm.
the economics are so close. Like, this, I'm going to charge a 1% fee. I'm going to charge a 1.5% fee, a 2% fee. It came down to who's running the job,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can I get Billy? Because I've already done 4 projects with Billy, and I know he runs a tight ship,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. So if you do a ground up project's different, right? That's contained easily. But if you do a tenant improvement, you're changing part of a floor plate. You're doing that and you have a general contractor come in that's going to manage that for you, right? Are you just leaving who comes on site to that general contractor, or are you actively involved in that process too? Or what if say you take the 3rd floor and you're converting over a wing to something else, right?
So you're right. There's a distinct difference between a greenfield project versus inside the hospital, touching
Yeah.
different spaces. Even if you have it walled off, right? They got to come in a certain way, go out a certain way. So I didn't go down to the point of picking the people. What I did was set the criteria.
Okay.
All of your people have to have
All performance
this.
based.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was honestly more how they behaved in the hospital than having to get into their skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and part of that is in construction. I mean, I owned a residential remodeling company, construction company for 3 years, but it's much different. Actually performing construction in a hospital, right? I wouldn't have the expertise to tell them how to do their work.
Sure.
Right. Now, what I did was I had my leads walk through the construction process, projects, and report back to my project manager, hey, they installed this upside down. I can't get to the access panel, right? Silly example, but true, right?
Oh, it happens.
Right, exactly. Or a better one is, why do I have so many holes in my firewall?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What's going on?
Yeah.
Right. So that was a common theme.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not, again, going back, you're not necessarily telling them who. Some people do.
Mm-hmm.
No, we have, like Remediate, we have customers that will literally say, I'll give you this PO if I get Shane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? We do have that.
Yep.
And we abide by it when we can, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So quick sidebar.
Yeah.
When you have that tenant improvement project going on, right? You're fixing up a space. Who controls the barrier? So you mentioned firewalls, right? Who controls the barrier for making sure dust and everything else doesn't go into the main hospital area? Is that the general contractor? Is that the hospital, a third-party contractor? Who's sort of the controls that?
Great question, and it's all over the place.
Okay.
I will say, woe is you if you leave it to the general contractor.
Mm-hmm.
There are companies that specialize in doing that, and they're going to be cheaper than the general contractor. Now, and by the way, you're going to back that out of the general contractor's fee, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would not. This is a really important thing in construction. It matters who the company is reporting to. So even if you force the general contractor to use a specific company that you're comfortable with for your barriers, if they're contracted to the general contractor and the general contractor is paying them, Do you think that company's going to come around and tell you they didn't do it right?
No.
Right. So we'll do a session or two on construction, and I really want Art here because he's forgotten more than I'll ever know. But one of the things that I used to do that used to make architects and GCs mad as hell was I would have a contract with the architect to me, a contract with the GC to me, and sometimes a contract with an engineer to me, specifically the mechanical. Because when you finish a project, a tenant improvement or some major floor remodel, and you've, revamped the HVAC, they'll turn the project over to you. There'll be problems, and they all know it. You don't know it because they work for the architect. So they're having these little huddles. What are we going to do about this? And they'll come up with some half-ass solution that, unless you catch it, you're going to live with it. Right? And by the way, getting people back out to do work after you've already paid them is difficult.
Yeah. That should be another episode or two.
Yeah.
The construction piece. For sure.
Right. So what I would typically do in terms of how my barriers were managed, I would use a contractor of my choosing to handle my barriers. And the documentation around pressurization and things like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, you don't have to. You can put the onus on the general contractor and spell that out. But you would be surprised how sloppy it gets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hospital environment's tough. Like you mentioned, pressurization. Like that's a tough thing to manage in a healthcare environment. Just that one topic alone.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I had 3 or 4 surveys as a Joint Commission surveyor go really wrong. There's a term called immediate threat to life, right? And as a surveyor, when you come across something that you think even comes close to, that area, you get the head surveyor. Head surveyors were always nurses or doctors. And so the first thing you got to do is you got to explain it to them because you know what? They don't know what you're talking about. And then you get on the phone with Chicago, and the hospital administration's freaking out. Chicago's they've got a whole group of engineers that are asking you 1,000 questions. You're taking pictures. So one of them was, as a part of the survey, as you're going around, you ask, do you have any active construction projects? Now, this to your point, do you send them home or not? Right? So one particular hospital had this project going. They didn't send them home. And the first thing I noticed when I walked up was, I don't think you have negative air here. Like, you don't have negative pressure. And then I look over.
You take your lighter out?
No.
I was holding back so hard just now.
I couldn't help it.
No, that's all right. Yeah, that's funny. That would have been funny. But there was a burn unit right across the hall. So now you got a problem because you're contaminating an area right outside of a burn unit. And by the way, the patients in the burn units, they're some of the most immunocompromised patients there are, and in a lot of cases they're in horrific pain, right? So you don't want to make it worse, right? So that was one of those instances where I had to bring Joint Commission corporate in the middle of it, and just to make sure that I understood how to handle the situation. And essentially what happened is they have to fix it immediately, and they have to demonstrate that it's fixed immediately. And the negative air machine was unplugged. That's what it was. Right? So they said, well, we plugged the negative air machine in. Okay, well, that's great, but how did it get unplugged? What happened? Get to the root cause of it, right? So you don't let them off that easy. You push them and make them put a process in place that they're validating that there's negative air.
Yeah, totally.
And essentially what I made them do was put an alarm on the negative air. So if it went positive, an alarm went off.
Mm-hmm.
And I made them do it before I left.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
relative to staffing, you talked about, like, let's go back to your time as a Joint Commission inspector, right? When you would walk into a facility and someone was using either their own employees or outsourced employees, did that make any difference to you? For an area or a topic, was there an inherent conflict of interest if
Ooh,
you're
that's a good question.
managing the inspections and managing the repairs and managing the maintenance, or nothing? Okay.
I had opinions,
Uh-huh.
right? And again, I'm not trying to offend anybody
Yeah.
out there, but I deal with, I'll have somebody say, it's not right for someone who does the inspection to do the repair. Whatever.
Everybody does that. The
Right.
elevator guy does that. The fire extinguisher guy does
Right.
that. Everybody does that.
The key is,
Yeah.
and now, is there a business logic to saying I want someone different to do the inspection than to do the repair? Maybe, right? It depends on the ethical nature of the company, right?
Mhm.
So, but from a Joint Commission surveyor, I didn't care, right? What I care about is your hospital safe and compliant from a life safety standpoint and an environment of care standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
right? So environment of care, your safety committee, your emergency management, we're sorry, damn, I punched it. We're looking at sterilizers, holes in walls, cleanliness, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Life safety, fire alarm, fire suppression, doors, dampers. I could usually tell what was going to happen from the document review, right? And you would see people who tried to insource things, and then you would have, and this is where, Art and I differ. And I would tell you, and you heard me say earlier, and I hope he watches this, he's forgotten more than I'll ever know. The difference is I've been to way more hospitals than he has, and actually surveyed more hospitals. So I saw a bunch of different variations as to how people do and prepare for a survey. Oftentimes when someone would insource a life safety issue, part of their program would be fantastic, and then there would be a gap, and you would say, what happened here? And they would go, well, we had a snowstorm, right? Or, we had a flood. So the weekly fire pump inspection got missed. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but yeah, I didn't care if they did it in-house.
Or not.
What I would do is I would spend more time validating that the in-house people had the credentials. I would actually make them demonstrate it to me. Typically, when you pay somebody to do it, they'll give you that information in their report.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, when people insource things related to life safety, they don't give you the information. Even if they did it right, they give you misleading information, confusing information, which, by the way, aggravates the hell out of a surveyor.
Right.
Right. We only have an hour and a half to do a document review. And if you have 4 to 8 generators and, you've got 3 fire pumps and you've got, all of these complicated systems that we have to go through, if I'm having to teach you how to set up your documentation, it's problematic.
Yeah.
Where if you're using a vendor, you should be in a better shape. Now, there were situations where I was with the Joint Commission and I probably not supposed to do this, but to the side, I would look at the director and go, you need to get somebody else. Like, their documentation's messed up. The director's stressed out. They're calling the company and they're asking for clarification. The company's not getting back to them. So they're going to get a finding. Even though they paid for the work to be done, change companies.
Yeah.
Right. Well, who should I use? I'm not getting into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can't talk about that.
Yeah.
But, I'm a firm believer in, challenge your staff, grow your staff, but make sure you don't set yourself up for failure in things that are absolutely critical to keeping your patients, staff, and visitors safe.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
That was always my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you, just another sidebar, when you walk in and you see the perfect report, right? Nothing's wrong, nothing's broken. Like if you have 1,000 fire doors and nothing's been wrong with the fire door, they just got the rubber stamp on it. Is that?
Oh, yeah.
Dive into the.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a red flag?
It's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
It's a brutal environment, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, brutal. I don't care whether
Yeah.
your damper is getting cycled on and off through power, through, I mean, emergency generator stuff,
Right.
through, I mean, so
yeah.
like stuff's always breaking in a hospital. I mean,
Right. It would throw up a huge red flag, and it would put me on high alert
mm-hmm.
because I'm not going to say I'm automatically thinking these people are unethical, but if they've got a perfect document review, the building tour should match that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it would also put you in a situation that makes you feel like you should dig a little deeper in general. If
Yeah.
you see a report that's perfect,
This looks too good.
yeah, show me your perfection.
So one of the things that the Joint Commission does, and I mean, I admire the Joint Commission. They're under a lot of pressure. They have a very short amount of time, whether you're talking about a clinical surveyor or a doctor, physician surveyor, or the life safety code surveyor. They have to cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time. They learn and they change their methodologies to reflect what happens in the field. So one thing they do is your smoke detectors have to be tested on an annual basis. So I go through your smoke detectors. None of them have failed. You got 1,000. None of them have failed. Show me last year's inspection. Now I'm looking at 2 years, and none of them have failed.
Yep.
So now I'm asking questions. Hey, who's checking into this? Are you sure this company's not just giving you a report? Are you sure they're actually testing your smoke detectors?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna cite them, but I'm gonna ask them questions in an attempt to make sure they're thinking about what's going on in their facility.
Mm-hmm.
It's much better to have a failure, to fix it, to retest it, to show that it passed. And if necessary, somewhere in the middle there, do an ILSM,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I feel like that should also bring up a red flag for the hospital itself, that if you've got a report that's perfection for 2-3 years, I would be asking, like, I don't want to go out and find repairs that I need to fix by any means, but 2 years of a perfect report, I would be like, what's going on here? Like, are you actually doing it?
So a common discussion might be, your report's perfect for 2 years. The facility director goes and calls the company, comes back and says, oh, okay, here's what they do. If it fails, they just fix it and then pass it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so then I'll have a discussion with the facility director and say, okay, look, my preference, right? I wouldn't do it that way. I would document what actually happened, demonstrate that it was fixed, demonstrate that it was retested, right? Just show the
documentation.
documentation.
And to that point, like NFPA now outlines you have to keep repair records for a lot of different things because of that.
Yeah.
To be able to show that, yeah, you actually had failures and you fixed those.
And you'll run into some weird interactions with some facility leaders where they're like, I want a clean report.
Yeah.
I mean, we get that.
Yeah.
I don't want any failures. I want a clean report.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And I've had discussions with customers to say, are you sure you want to do that? Here's what I would do. No, this is what I want. And then I've also had customers that say, I want a bloody report. And normally the reason that is because they're pissed off because they've been asking for funds to fix what they know is wrong. And if they can get an official bloody report, they feel like they've got a better chance. Or it gets into what you said earlier, where you kind of look at them and go, I told you so.
Yeah.
Right. With the board member, right? Now, again, I'm going a little bit off track here, but here's another piece of advice. If you're in the middle of a survey, never, ever badmouth your administration to the surveyor. The surveyor is going to ask you questions, and they're gonna find things, and they're gonna ask you things like, well, you know, what's your plan to get this fixed? Especially if you have a repeat issue.
Mm-hmm.
I've found 7 penetrations. I've been up in the ceiling 3 times. Right? You got an issue. You don't have a above the ceiling program.
Yeah.
I've been asking for it. What do you mean you've been asking for it? Oh, I talk to administration all the time. Who in administration? Well, I report to the CFO. Okay, well, I mean, what do they tell you? Well, we don't have the money. They got to buy a new blah, blah, blah for clinical. You're going to get this is what's going to happen. I'm going to score a leadership finding against your hospital administration. Remember, these reports go to boards, right?
Yep.
You don't want to be responsible for getting your hospital administration a leadership finding.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would tell you, and this is brutal, if you work in a hospital and your administration knows you have life safety issues and they're blatantly not giving you the funds to fix it, and you've done your job, which means you haven't blown something out of proportion, you've explained it well, you've given them, you've went and gotten, multiple bids, under scope clarification, and it just keeps happening, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Find another job.
And for the place you're at, if you document that you went and put in a request to go get funding to get something fixed, right? Because if the CFO says no at that point in time, you do have a giant get out of jail free card. It's like,
but
and I'm not saying bring it up to the Joint Commission inspector, but
it just doesn't work that way, though.
Huh.
Yeah, it really doesn't. As you think that, I'm not saying it never happens,
Okay.
right? But on a whole, man, humans protect themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
People protect themselves. And so, I mean, I've had it happen to me where not in the Joint Commission sense, but I do remember a very specific case where I put in for capital a motor for an air handler that served the OR.
okay.
And we actually did what's called condition-based maintenance, which we had sensors on the certain components of the motor, and we would measure certain things, vibration, things like that. And we would get reports back that would say, green, it's in good shape, yellow, something, it's getting worse, red, you need to deal with this right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had all the information that said we need to replace this. Kept getting kicked down the road. Saturday morning, air handler fails. Everybody freaks out. CEO's calling me because there's somebody traveling in from Dallas to have a surgery. We're not going to be able to do the surgery because we need this one room. I'm trying to, and we solved it. We got a motor. We went and picked up a motor, brought it in, had it put in. But the next morning when I'm talking to the CEO, and the CEO, and my boss was the CFO, is drilling me, the CFO never stepped in and said, oh, this was on the capital list. We just didn't approve it, right? Now, when I got back to my boss's office, I was like, son of a bitch, why didn't you jump in here, right? Come on, man. So
What'd he say?
I didn't remember. It's
That's where you and I are different. I would have told the CEO I put it in.
I'm very similar to you. Like, well, I told you so.
I mean, been like, yep.
Yeah.
and maybe that is the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, but by the way, I didn't stay there long.
That's
Right.
probably good.
Yeah,
Probably a good thing you didn't. Yeah.
I don't want to work in an environment where it's 100% reactive,
Yeah.
right? And that in and of itself happens way more than we realize. Like being a facility director, manager, it's really difficult,
Mm-hmm.
right? So going back, full circle, I feel like I'm taking us all over
No,
the place.
it's all good. This is fun.
I always thought of things like, I'm going to do this to make my life easier,
Mm-hmm.
right? I created a paint program. So when the administrators would ask me, can you paint my office? I'd have a spreadsheet where it was, and I had socialized this, right? Your office is an office. It gets painted once every 7 years. My focus is on the patient rooms and the public areas. That worked about 95% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Every now and then you'd have somebody that pitch a fit, and you'd go, okay, fine, well, I'll paint it, whatever, leave me alone, right?
Yep.
Yeah. How we doing on time?
We got about 10 minutes left, looks like. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I really
on the,
enjoy hearing your guys' stories.
he's got way more than I do.
I don't know. I've never been trapped in a ceiling, though. That's pretty cool.
Oh, I got plenty of good stories. I'm just I don't know how many are or viewer appropriate. No.
Hey, it's after hours, man.
Oh, it is after hours.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh. I got to tell a quick story. So we talked about the snow control last time, right?
Yeah.
So my first job was working for a chemical company doing chemicals for snow removal. And you talk about employees and directions you give them and stuff. We were talking about that relative to snow control. And so we went to the city of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and
Okay.
and we were going to treat their salt so that their salt could work at a lower temperature. And so they had a big, huge pile of salt. And the storm's coming and like, get it done, get it done, get it done. But not a lot of like guidelines other than we got to work at cold temperatures, right? So,
Right.
so one of the things we did is we would go get a coloring agent to put this treatment on the salt so it would grab sunlight.
Okay.
And so I'm like, do you have a color you want to use? And he's like, whatever, just get it treated like the snow's coming tomorrow. And so went out and figured a good dark color, right? So got purple dye and put it in this solution that we were treating the salt with. And about a fourth of the way done treating this giant pile, and this guy comes running out like screaming, stop, stop. And you would have thought someone died, right?
Right.
And he's like, you have to get rid of this and get a different color. We're like, well, why? He goes, remember he's in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah.
Green Bay Packers. He's like, if I put purple salt on the
Vikings.
streets,
Vikings.
he goes,
Oh.
I will lose my job,
Oh,
right?
no.
And he was dead serious. So we had shut down the operation for a day, go get a whole different color.
Oh, no.
And, I mean,
I believe it. Yeah.
he was
That's awesome.
freaking out that we had he's like, I'll put this in the rural area. Where
I was gonna say, did he end up using that purple
yeah,
stuff?
we're like, hey, you told us you didn't care what color, right?
Oh
Like,
my gosh.
so we went and got dark green, and then he was all happy.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's great. I believe that too, man. That's you go up in those areas. Yeah.
Football is life.
Oh yeah.
I much sillier story, but I worked in Pittsburgh a lot, and I worked in this hospital, and the guy that I reported to it was when I worked for Sodexo. The Falcons were playing the Steelers, and I lived in Atlanta at the time and just traveled in, and this was when Michael Vick was the quarterback, and so we made a bet. It was like $100, and back then the Steelers were way better than the Falcons. The Falcons won. The guy wouldn't talk to me. Like for 2 weeks he wouldn't talk. He was so mad. I'm like, man, come on. I don't really care. Keep the money, right? But it's so important to. I mean, it's interesting how that works in certain communities. And
Well, we're in Kansas City.
Yeah.
It's,
yeah,
It's in our blood.
It is totally. What do you
I
know?
mean, come
exactly.
on.
Look at this.
yeah.
It's Red Friday, baby.
Yeah. I get in trouble all the time because I forget to wear the clothing on the appropriate days.
Yeah.
Because we at the office will wear either blue for the Royals or
Yeah.
red for the Chiefs, and I forget every time.
I'll
But
send you a text reminder.
I need that. Yeah.
We need to get you a Chiefs Mickey shirt.
a Chiefs Mickey shirt.
Yeah.
There you go.
What is that?
Mickey Mouse wearing a Chiefs shirt.
Oh,
It'd be
okay.
perfect for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just have the Mahomes jersey.
Hey, that'll work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I have the stuff. I just forget
We
to
just
wear
need to wear it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we've had this topic now for 2 sessions, right? So
Right.
if you were to boil it all down, let's take that new facility manager coming in, right?
Right.
What advice do you give that person relative to staffing and the people that they want to pull on their team, and then again the people that they want to supplement or augment, with their own employees? What's the advice you give to that person?
So, one, go understand the benchmarks. Understand your facility, understand the benchmarks. To survive, I would start out with making sure you had good contractors, plumbing, HVAC, and electrical. and focus because usually you're understaffed. So focus your team on things that take the noise down, right? So make sure the grass is cut. I mean, usually using a vendor for that. Have a way to pick up trash, take care of your paint work orders, your holes in the wall work orders, and work with your team on being customer facing.
Mm-hmm.
Teach them how to deal with nurses. We talk about facilities management being tough. Man, nursing, oh my gosh. Like, those typically ladies are under so much pressure. And so when you're dealing with them and they're telling you they're hot or they're cold or they need this or they need that, teach your team how to handle that. Mm-hmm. Find a solution, right? Mm-hmm. You got to be a solution finder, right? So, okay, know your benchmarks, teach your team to be customer facing, take care of the noise, which is usually low priority work orders. And then over time, find your people on your team that have promise or what's it called, drive, and drive them into the trades. And then you can start doing some of the trade stuff yourself, right? But educate your administration on where you are in staffing, where you want to be. Educate HR on what your pay scales should be. Don't depend on the report that they got from some clinical staffing, or advisory company on, what your pay should be. Take control of that. Mm-hmm. Create the rules for your contractors. Make them, it's always good to have a public execution every now and then, right? So when just to remind your contractors you're serious, mm-hmm. So periodically shoot one in the foot, right? Let it be known. You're not behaving the way you're supposed to, you're out for 3 months. I'll talk to you in 3 months, mm-hmm. right? Shake it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Here's another thing. We didn't talk about this at all, but this is really important, a time saver. So often what happens is a facility leader's doing something, their administrator comes down and says, hey, I need to get the nursery taken care of. Board member such and such, blah, blah, blah. We just got $100,000 donated, and I got to get this done fast, right? So you're like, okay. So you walk the administrator, and she says, I want the handrails replaced. I want this painted. I want new cove base. And you're writing. Okay, so here's what happens. They have a rule they're going to have 3 quotes. So the facility leader calls 3 companies, schedules 3 meetings, does 3 walkthroughs. Don't do that. Take 10 minutes, type it on a Word document, have 1 meeting, 3 companies come to the 1 meeting, 1 walkthrough, all questions come in email, all answers go in email, everybody's included in the questions and everybody's included in the answers. Mm. You have to have your price here, in by this date, no exceptions. You don't give me your price, you don't get to play. Mm-hmm. That'll save people a ton of time. Or in the middle of that stressful conversation with your CEO, who asks you to do this in an unreasonable amount of time, say, you're going to let me skip the 3 bid thing, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And then go to your favorite contractor who bails you out every single time.
Yeah.
And then do you take for those mechanical, electrical, plumbing, MEP stuff, like the critical 3, right? Do you have, if you're in a decent sized facility, do you have 2, 3, 4, 1? What do you?
Always 2.
Always 2. Okay.
Always 2.
Yep.
Yeah, at least 2. Mm-hmm. I didn't like to go more than 2 because it got confusing. And you always had to be careful too, because your staff will have favorites. Mm-hmm. So you need to make sure that they're the favorite for the right reason, right? Yeah. It's not because they're taking them hunting or taking them fishing or whatever.
That never happens.
Right. But yeah, no, I would have 2, just simply because you don't always want to have all your eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. That's just important, right? I did violate that rule one time where I only used 1 mechanical engineer mm-hmm. for 7 years when I was at a hospital.
Yeah.
But the reason I did that was because they made a mistake. There was a mistake made in a construction project. we all had a meeting. The mechanical engineer stepped up and said, I made the mistake, and here's what I did, and here's what I should have done. Right? And so we solved it. It was easy peasy instead of, I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Right? So
I can imagine certain things like a architect. It's problematic to have more than one. I mean, a lot of times, because how do you keep current as-built? Who's keeping them? Working with other people's stuff. I mean,
do they know your strategic plan?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, cool. So for next time, what are you guys thinking?
You know what? I'd like to get some feedback. We've got some listeners. I really appreciate it. I'd love to get some feedback for some topics on what you guys might want to talk about. If I'm pressed now, I would say we would do the construction conversations next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we put up something on the bottom of the screen that says email your stuff? We do? All right.
Yeah.
So if I point and go like there, and then it's just going to appear there?
Yeah.
Is that how this works?
Yeah.
You're the master at this.
I mean, we have socials where they can leave comments. So check out our socials and then make sure that you leave comments, and you can DM us and let us know what topics you want to hear. If you have a guest that you want to shout out, because I know, throughout the rest of the season, we're going to be pulling people to be guests on here. So, just interact. Tell us what you want to hear. These guys and Art are full of so much information, and it's just a blast sitting in here listening and picking their brains. So it's your guys' turns.
Yeah. Art, you were great today, by the way.
Yeah, it's such a good job, buddy.
I think it's his best performance.
He's not even here to defend himself. It's great. We love you, Art.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for hanging out with us on FM After Hours. Make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms for your regular dose of facility insights. As always, a big shout out to Remediate and Granger for their gracious sponsorships. Catch you next time on FM After Hours.